Hi everyone, and thank you for attending this C-Trade Cruise Talk panel session, Post-COVID IT Optimisation, how IT departments can do more with less. I'm Ian Richardson, CEO and co-founder of TheICEway and C-Trade Global's Technology Ambassador. Now on today's session, we are going to be talking about IT operations and how the COVID situation has impacted what tasks IT departments have been focusing on. We'll also be discussing how cruise lines are making decisions around where to spend limited budgets and how they're still managing to innovate during these tough times. So on our panel today, we have, we're very privileged to have three people from two of the leading cruise lines that have taken time out of their very busy lives to share some insight with us. So let's first start with maybe some introductions. I'd like to just go around the virtual table one by one. If you could all just spend a couple of minutes each and tell the audience who you are, the company you work for, and the role that you perform there. Maybe starting with you, Jean-Louis.
Okay, so hello everybody. So my name is Jean-Louis Cambert. I'm after 10 years of different IT services company. I've taken the position of CIO for different entities. First was for a transport and logistic US company. After 6 years in CMA Ships. CMA Ships is a ship owner for own fleets for CMA CGM. And at the end, since 2011, I took this position in Ponant. Just a little word on Ponant. So Ponant since 10 years take a very important position in the luxury cruise market. In fact, we propose some extreme destinations and unusual destinations associated with a French lifestyle, gastronomy, and so on. Myself, I had to manage the big development of Ponant because when I arrived in Ponant, we had only 5 ships, and now we have 13 in only 9 years. So it's very, very huge, and including acquisition of Paul Gauguin Cruise 2 years ago now. But we have to keep the quality of service, despite we switch from 20,000 passengers to nearly 80,000 now. So it was really a challenge.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jean-Louis. Maybe as you're on screen, maybe you, Dimple.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dimple Jethani, and I am one half of the CIO role, which I'll explain shortly, for Norwegian Cruise Line Holdings. Both myself and Scott come from a consulting background, both Big Four and our own consulting firm. And I think the topic of today, doing more with less, is the reason why Frank hired us both together to run IT. In terms of what's under my responsibility, I'm IT operations and governance. So I have the governance team, all demand intake of the organization, running the business and finance of IT, the shipboard application side, new build dry dock project management, as well as network infrastructure and cybersecurity and automation tools across the board and for ship and shore. And primarily return to service responsibilities as we look at how we get back in the water together.
Yeah, that's quite a role. Is there anything left for Scott to do?
Ian, it's always hard to follow that. It's always hard. But yeah, so my name is Scott Piccolo, and as Dimple had mentioned, Dimple and I have actually worked together for over 20 years. And we had our own consulting firm for many years. One of our clients happened to be Norwegian Cruise Lines, where we ultimately decided to take these positions about 2 years ago as co-CIOs. And the way we've divided up our organization, I have all enterprise applications as well as emerging technology. So at least I get some of the fun stuff. You know, and obviously we work very closely together. So there's areas where, you know, there's kind of a combination of our teams in terms of how we approach things. And, you know, RTS, for example, Dimple's leading that charge. But many of my team members are also a big part of that, those initiatives.
Yeah, and you definitely, the two of you definitely come as a pair. That's for sure. And I know that from working with NCL in our company, it's great to work with you both. So it's very good. Okay, so what I want to do first really is just to look. Maybe let's start with looking back to the start of this situation. Probably about a year ago now. It's coming up to it. It feels like maybe 10 years, but it was only a year ago, or less than a year ago, when the pandemic brought everything to a kind of grinding halt. So maybe starting with you, Dimple and Scott, what were your immediate challenges back last spring when at NCLH, and how did you manage to overcome them? What were the first things that you had to deal with?
I think, early on in January, I remember we were actually in Kona visiting our most recent new build, Regent Splendor. And quickly, I think there was a crisis with one of the cruise ships out in Europe, and our crisis team got together. We knew something is coming. I don't know that everybody knew the magnitude of where we were headed, but we quickly realized we had to do two things within IT. And that was one, we had to transition this workforce to work from home, right? That was key. And I think really early on in March, we knew we had to start scaling back on costs. Things were changing. And we had to quickly look at not at just our OpEx costs, but our capital costs, and look at what we could do. There was a directive, obviously, that came in from our finance team, but I think from an IT perspective, we've been very business oriented, which I think has been a benefit how we've run this organization. We knew we had to get ahead of things. And obviously, significant capital spend is part of our organization.
Yeah, and I think we were fortunate in that we were ahead of that, right? We didn't wait until someone said, you need to start doing these things. We were already doing a lot of that, and then just sort of accelerated the program, if you will. So by the time our executive leadership said, "Hey, we needed to be doing these things," we were well on our way. So I think that was that was good timing. I can say that from a technology perspective, and a lot of the work we had done in the months leading up to that, we were very fortunate in that we put a lot of things in place that allowed that to happen. We always joke that if this had started 6 months earlier, we would have been in real trouble. It would have been much more difficult for us to achieve what we were able to achieve.
And I think there were multiple things that had gone on. There was the idea of driving our cybersecurity program, and those tools allowed us to be able to go to home more effectively, and tools that made that easy. What does it mean to be VPN-less? So I think the transition might have surprised everybody, maybe even surprised us. I know it surprised our leadership how smooth it was. Knock on wood, it did not become this rat race of trying to catch up with everything that was going wrong. It was small. We advanced the service desk. We created a VIP service desk. We were ready to serve the community the minute they went home, and actually went very, very smooth. Tremendous, a testament to our organization.
And that's a good point. Is cybersecurity is probably one of the biggest drivers of being able to, because as everyone in the IT space knows, what happened as soon as everyone in the planet started going to work from home, it became this target-rich environment for the bad guys, right? So you really had to tighten up your shop. You really had to make sure that you had it dialed in, because you were incredibly vulnerable and exposed when your workforce was no longer controlled in this one space and within your network, and you've got it basically distributed all over the world. And in a way where you can't manage that, right? People are working on their home Wi-Fi, and you don't know how secure that is. So there were a lot of factors that go into that. So it was really fortunate that became, and that was a big driver for Dimple, that in her organization, her first, the day we started, that was mission one, was to clean up cybersecurity and do a lot of that work and bring those tools in. And that ended up, I don't want to say we got lucky, but it ended up being the right call, because that really helped us make that transition and make it well.
And I don't think anybody expected everybody to be working from home and not in the office for this long, right? I think we maybe thought it was going to be maybe 2 or 3 months, and then we'd be going back. But it's here we are still. So I'm going to just bring Jean-Louis in, Jean Cambert. So what about you? What were the first initial things that you were dealing with, Jean-Louis?
Yeah, I fully agree that the situation shows that IT is the only way to preserve activity and capability to be operational. So it's quite funny because we got some budget that we pushed since 1 or 2 years and didn't obtain before. But as you said, for example, full deployment for full IP telephone system, including the call center, because having the call center, each people of the call center remotely at home is really a revolution for us. And the problems of cybersecurity, sure. Deployment of the global VPN for everybody, every laptop, and new tools for controlling the flow and controlling the activity to be sure that we don't have any bad bad action made by external. So it was a good thing for on IT perspective because it was absolutely necessary, so no choice. So it was really good.
Yeah, I think it's made every business reevaluate a lot of things about office work and also about the location of resources as well, about where you can resource from, because now you can pretty much resource from anywhere because everybody's used to working from anywhere. So that's certainly something that we've realized. So okay, so with the immediate challenges dealt with, what sort of things have you sort of been dealing with during the shutdown, and what's your main focus right now? Maybe either of you, maybe Scott and Dimple, or you, Jean-Louis.
Sure that Dimple.
I took the last one. You go first, Jean-Louis. Your turn.
Okay, so sure, some priority changed completely. We had to stop some project, not urgent project. For example, our warehouse management system, and some other subject have been pushed by the necessity of the crisis. For example, digitalisation or paperless in the future will be very important.
Yeah, I think it's fast-tracked a lot of, even though a lot of projects have got sort of shelved or frozen, there's been quite a few that have been aligned with what people need to do that have actually, you've just had to fast-track. I think that's been quite the same across all the industry, hasn't it?
I think it's multi-pronged for us when I look at least just from the IT operations governance side of the house. In transition to work from home, what we did was accelerate the deployment of our technologies to the workforce, that maybe that we would slow down that process. You don't want to bring that much change to the organization, but you had no choice. So we took full advantage of that, of getting all of our new tech out there as much as we can from a work productivity perspective. So I think there was a huge benefit there. We were allowed to accelerate that. We look at things like single sign-on, Okta, Zscaler, things like that. Tremendous push to go quickly. Obviously, there were stopping projects across the board, and I know myself and Scott, key projects were stopped. And the things that we focus on, no different than anybody else in our industry, is what do we need to do to return to service, and what technologies in that. And I know that we've been hyper focused on things that are not throwaway. What can I do that's going to make our passengers and our guests feel safe with us, but also that improves the guest experience. So I think a lot of what we're doing, I think that Scott and I are both thrilled about, is that we think a lot of it isn't throwaway. There are some things that we think will go away, right? But I think we're happy to say a lot of things that we're investing in will stay.
Yeah. And I think it also created a sort of a different environment in terms of how things get funded. I think it's helped us because we've really been, it's been a big part of what Dimple and I have tried to do. And I say instilling a culture, changing, not just within IT, but also within our entire organization, and how they work with IT, how they view IT, and allowing us to be more at the beginning of the process when we start talking about looking at new technology and how that might work, and making sure that it fits into a strategy. And all this did was sort of help us really focus that process, right? Really focus that, the way we go about procuring technology and why we do it, and how we go about determining, should we work on this or should we work on something else? This really helped us kind of, create that more modern process for that, which we're going to take, right? When this thing is over, that doesn't go away. We can then take that and refine it, and that helps. So in a way, it sort of accelerated, again, something else that we were really working on, which is a better management of demand within IT, and how we go about determining what's most important. Because we are tri-branded, for example. So we don't, we don't have one source of we don't have one business to support per se. So when we look at things, we have to look at them across all the organizations and say, okay, I know what's number one to you. I know what's number one to you, and I know what's number one to you. Oh, and also, we of course we've got hotel ops and chip and other areas of the business. It's all important. We get that, but we need a process in place so that we can better manage all of that, that demand intake. And I think that was critical. And I think that was one of those little silver linings where we were able to because everything started getting scaled down, and because people really had to, there had to be really strong support for a lot of these initiatives. I think it created that more focused process. And I think it's been good for us. And I think we're going to take that. And our job now is to not return to the way it was before. Our job now is to then take that and refine it and make a better process going forward. So I don't know. I look at that as a slight silver lining, if you will, that we get out of this.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, when times are good, there's less focus on making those right decisions.
100%, 100%. That is true. It's it's something you learned in business school about, when a company is cash rich, things are done differently than when you've got to tighten up the belt strap. And when you have to tighten up the belt strap is when you can become more efficient, and you can have better control over what we should and shouldn't be doing. And from our perspective, our company is as a whole is very young, right? When you look at it, when I say that, what I mean is it's not been that many years since NCL acquired PCH. So NCL used to be its own entity doing its own thing. And PCH was two brands that had kind of also been pulled together, but it ultimately learned how to do everything in a certain way. Now you pull those all together. That was, I don't know, 4 years ago, five, no, I guess
2016.
Almost six now. 2015.
Yeah, but you think about, so what Dimple and I still have to deal with is a lot of technical debt, right? A lot of redundant systems, a lot of processes that are unique across those different, so there's all these things that we were already dealing with on a massive scale when everything was working, and everybody says, well, this has always worked this way. I don't want to change. Everything's great. I don't want to change. Well, now we have this situation where we're all together as one, dealing with this situation, and for the good of the entire organization, we have to look at how we go about kind of rebuilding ourselves. And from our perspective, I think it's been very helpful. I don't want to say helpful, but it's been a silver lining in that we're no longer that cash fat company. We are now that lean, tighten your belt company, and it helps us to manage that process, because it's hard when everything's great, because everybody wants what they want. And I get it,
Do you think it's made your job easier in terms of the role that you've been brought in to do, you guys?
In a sense.
Because that was kind of what you've been brought in to do, isn't it? So.
Yeah, in a sense, because when Frank hired us, one of the things that he said was, or Frank and Mark, one of the things that, I want you to be change agents, right? And that's, we'll say a cliche type term, whatever, but we knew what he meant. He knew us. He knew us from our prior experience as a consultant to NCL. He knew how we delivered. And he wanted to see an organization that had that same culture, that same process. And well, we knew we could get there, but I do believe in some odd way, the silver lining here was that this accelerated our process, right? It by no means has been good.
No.
Or anything like that. Don't get me wrong. But it was one of those things that it really accelerated. It did help accelerate our process, because people all had to really reevaluate what was important to them and what was important to this organization. Not me and my little world, but as our entire organization. And that's a cultural shift, right?
Yeah, definitely. So, John Louis, would you, I guess, agree with that? I mean, how have you been making decisions in terms of the choice of investment over this last year, and also which suppliers to choose?
I fully agree that things changed completely. It means we had been create a new thing. For example, last summer we had to create a full new schedule for seven vessels in 2 months, and we saw that our systems are not capable to be so reactive. So we have to change that. Same thing. Paul Gauguin has been acquired 2 years ago, but the IT systems are not merged. And due to the pandemic, we have been obliged to switch from Paul Gauguin to another vessel from Ponant, and nothing was ready. So we are obliged to merge the IT systems and the booking systems. It's sure. It just shows how late we are in improving process, and decision has been taken very quickly to, for example, for Paul Gauguin to merge the two systems now. So yeah.
So I guess the takeaway from this is that there's nothing like a bit of pressure to get things done. Is that?
Sure. Unfortunately, it's a little bit too late, but now decisions are taken, so we can have action, and we start this kind of project, pending project, but we start now because it's mandatory before activity come back. It's a good opportunity to conduct this kind of project during reducing activity and also ships in layup.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that you were sailing. Obviously, you had some ships sailing over summer, which you obviously had to get all the IT systems working for and change all the itineraries. But what kind of experiences do you feel that gave you in terms of preparing for a full restart? What sort of things did you learn? Because obviously you in terms of the regulations and requirements, I guess you were following the European Healthy Gateways requirements over the summer.
Yeah. We demonstrated the difficulty to be sure that to provide to the customers the safe cruise.
Right.
Despite all system tracking, medical form, etc., we succeed to maintain a cruise during this summer. But we thought that at the end of probably we were the last one, the last cruise company to sail, because we stopped in beginning of October. But it's true that it's more and more difficult at the beginning of the second lockdown to maintain cruise. So that's why we decided also to stop completely until April. And now we can understand what type of process we can put in place in the future to avoid from the last situation we had at the end of the summer, and also on the IT system flexibility, because we absolutely need to change to be able to change the schedule, the itinerary, for example, the medical form and so on, depending on the new rules on each country, on each governmental rules of each country.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the medical questionnaire forms, because they've always traditionally been paper across the industry for expedition cruise lines, but presumably you've got digital versions of this, and obviously you've had to adapt adapt the medical forms as well over
Yeah,
the
absolutely,
few
absolutely.
years?
Yeah, it was already a big subject for the expedition cruise lines. So we already had a homemade application for managers, but we improve it, especially for the charter, to be able
Yeah.
to share the control and the control process and the contact with the customer of our customer to be sure that everybody is informed, everybody um, checked the form, and that and on the medical side we absolutely validated each passenger to be able to embark. So from the departure to the disembarkation.
Okay.
And yeah.
Do you see, and from Dimple, Scott, do you think in terms of the digitalization of all the pre-check forms and the medical questionnaires, is that something you'll have to introduce at NCL as well? Because obviously they're not, NCL aren't an expedition company, but now with the new regulations, is that something that you're going to have to get information up front from passengers in advance?
We're already engaged in that process, and I think it's something, again, we talk about not throwing technology away. I think it's great, right? What do you do with the paper? How do you really know what the responses were? I think that's critical, whether it's COVID or some other type of disease, that we have kind of a pre-check of information. And putting it on paper, I don't think is as valuable as getting that as part of your check-in process and having that in your medical systems and having record of that. And I think that gives you a tremendous amount of data about your passengers. That it's critical for their health and safety. So we've looked at that process, and I think that also expedites the process of check-in, right? So it serves two purposes.
Yep. Yeah. To the point that Bull's making, it's something we can look at and go, you know what, this is just good guest experience anyway. So again, there's a good example of a technology that we put in place in this COVID world that we feel is still very valuable, as you know, and we can expand upon that, right? We can take that and continue to refine that and evolve that for the guest experience. So I think it's important. Yeah.
I guess anything that reduces friction is a good thing.
Passports, visas, all the things that we do manually, whatever we can put around that process is our focus, and taking advantage of that during this time.
Yeah. What would you say has been the most challenging area in operationalizing some of the return to service requirements? I'll let Scott answer that one.
I think Scott's a great answer. We'll let him. We just walked through this topic earlier today.
Well,
right?
yeah, I think that team unity, morale, it's the people. I think the uncertainty that we've been saddled with as an industry is difficult. When you've got everyone working remotely, you tend to, we do as much as we can, right, to continue to create a sense of community, right, within our organization. But you do tend to lose that. You don't have that same culture that you have when you're all in the office and you can, grab a cup of coffee and have a conversation about something that could lead to an idea that could lead to, hey, let's get some folks together. I mean, those, innovation happens that way, and those types of things don't happen when we're sitting on a Zoom call. It's just very, very difficult. You have to be very specific about it. So there's that, and then there's just the overall morale. People they just feel disconnected, and that's challenging. Of course, just maintaining a really talented staff is very difficult, because now we're in a whole new world where people can work from home and they can work pretty much anywhere in the world they want. So, we're competing, right, with a lot of different organizations for our talent. And again, we're in an industry that has this thing over our heads. We're the only industry, when preaching to the choir in this call, or in this meeting, but we are the only industry in the world that is being, that is seeing this kind of impact from COVID. COVID has impacted everyone. I'm not suggesting that, it's only us, but when you look at how it's impacted us as an industry, I think everyone can honestly say it's far and above anyone else. So that creates uncertainty for people, a certain level of discomfort. When are we going to sail again? When are we going to sail again? When are we going to? Because everybody understands that we are operating on you know a limited amount of funding, and our executive team's done a phenomenal job in managing that. But we need to at some point have some point that we can say that's when we're going to start sailing again, and then revenues will come and things will start to return to normal. But until we get there, that has probably been the biggest from my perspective. And Dimple, that
it's the big unknown. It's impossible to plan, right?
Everything else is like I said, I feel like the work that we had done prior to this set us up to be successful, and now we can just continue that, and we can take this when I say different type of organization that we've tightened the belt strap. I think that helps us in terms of managing input, demand for IT. So all that's okay. We've managed that. We're pretty good there. Obviously on the on the return to service side, there's the challenge of the unknown, because everyone is sorting this out, and everybody is still, including the agencies that are governing what we should be doing. We're all together figuring it out, right? We're all figuring out what makes the most sense and what's going to be the most valuable thing, and it changes, right? And if that is constantly changing, then obviously it makes it more difficult for us. So how do I implement a solution that can change with it? Or that, if I don't know what the target is, how do I hit it? So those are some of the biggest challenge from my perspective. That's probably the biggest challenge.
I think I'll add to that in two things. If a European requirement, an Asian requirement, and the US requirement, the Caribbean is different, that creates a challenge, especially with flexibility of old systems, legacy systems. So I've got to be able to flex with that. And it would be great as a global community if we had a standard set of rules. Everybody has to be vaccinated. Everybody needs a test at the terminal when you disembark. Whatever that is, I think that'd be immensely helpful. It's not just the technology, it's the people in the process. Right now, I've got to train crew and staff to do something different here versus different here. And I could start an itinerary in one country, especially this is in the EU, right? And I move across different countries and they've got different regulations. So we've got the general EU standards, but that shifts. So I think that's a challenge, and sorting through that for our operations team, saying, okay, am I good here? What do I need to do here? I think that's one big challenge yet to be dealt with. But as the vaccination, I think, becomes more widely distributed, more folks are vaccinated, I think that'll change the environment, and that'll give us some of the stability we're looking for, and eliminate some of the unknown. Yep. And I think the second thing is, when we look at health technology vendors, wow, this is a whole new market. Everything's new. These aren't products that have been out there for many, many years. So accelerating the implementation of these, making them operational, making them secure from a cyber security perspective, redundant, making sure they've got the right uptime to handle the volume. That's all new. We're the ones that are charting that course, right? So I think that's the other thing that is challenging. We're dealing with it. And I think all the changes Scott and I've talked with that we've made are allowing us to make sure we vet our technologies correctly. We do a good job of vetting those before we go to the ship. We can't just be on the ship whenever we want anymore, right? With COVID, we're limiting the number of resources that are on ship for absolute critical items. We're looking at, how do I do more remote deployments? Let me set up my lab properly. So I'm really tightening up most of my testing implementation at our lab. We didn't have that before. That's something that we kickstarted as part of our tenure here. So I think those are big things that we have dealt with. And that's going to help us. And actually, I would love for our team to change our mindset of always being on the ship to do deployments in general, even after this.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, actually, because John Louis, you mentioned, I think, a recent project that you'd been, because I was going to move on to costs and about how we're managing to become more efficient and how we're adapting to the current circumstances. And John Louis, we had a conversation about, I think, a recent project where you've carried it out completely remotely on the ship. I think it was an SPMS upgrade, or
yeah, sure. We took the opportunity that all our vessels are in layups to make this big operation that's nearly impossible during exploitation. So it's true that it's a huge task, but it can be made remotely and globally, because all ships must be made in the same time, and also remotely by the Oracle team. It's avoid to send on each vessel a different engineer with during 2 weeks, 3 weeks, build another system in parallel and switch in during the night. Some nightmare that we don't want to reproduce. So yes, for this operation, for example, it was a really good opportunity. Layup was a really good opportunity.
Well, you can get it done sort of quicker and for less cost as well. And
yeah,
you don't
sure,
necessarily need engineers there on every single ship.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just to say one thing that is very important for us is the number of call we still have at the call center. All our customers want to sail and want to make cruise, so it's really positive for in this way. So but we need to propose them process to have safe cruise, to be sure that because on expedition cruise, you can imagine that in the middle of nowhere, on the North Pole, where having a positive case should be very anxious. Would be very anxious. So, but we are our customer are convinced that we can restart.
Yeah. And I guess that's an area of uniqueness about expedition cruising is the remoteness of the cruise, isn't it? That makes your incident management that much more difficult, I guess.
Sure. That's why, for example, we improve our hospital with the last technology in terms of the PCR detection and resurrection system. In the worst case, I would say, yes, it's a necessity. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. So I think we've talked a lot about well, I wanted to come on to managing costs, and we've talked a little bit about it, but how have you managed to sort of keep innovating while sort of keeping the cost down over the last year? Have you, and I think we've talked about decision making as well, but I mean, you know, how do you remain innovative? I think, Scott, you touched on it in terms of it's difficult when you're remote, and everybody's remote, is because those sort of coffee machine conversations don't necessarily happen. It's difficult when everybody's on Zoom. So, I mean, have you had any thoughts on how you sort of can sort of keep innovating within the industry?
Yeah.
From IT operations.
Yeah, I think, you know, Dimple and I always had ideas of where we wanted to go, what our plan was, our strategy, and that hasn't changed. Some things have obviously been put on pause and you know, during this time, but it doesn't mean that internally we can't do some things to set some groundwork. We're still going to do the things we want to do. We might not just be able to do them right now. So, for example, that might be, we right now are pushing very hard to move all of our key initiatives to a more agile methodology, going to more of a product model. And what that's going to do is that's going to help us. It's a foundational piece. It's going to help us with innovation in the future, where we can then start to build applications that we can get into production in weeks, not months or years, that type of thing. So we have to do a lot of that work in order to get there. The other thing is, quite honestly, again, this kind of goes back to you know, when you're a lean organization, you have to look at every opportunity and say, where's that value? I mean, it just becomes even more critical, more important. And I think that in a way helps, because then it sort of shines a light on some of these, you know, what we think are very innovative things that we want to do, because you can quickly see the value to the organization, quickly see the value to the company, whether that's a monetary value or it's an overall guest experience value, these are all things that are going to, they're going to make a difference. And I think you see it more when you're in this type of environment. I think it just naturally shines that light on these types of initiatives. And it forces us as an organization, and again, this is outside of IT, our entire organization, it forces us to all come together and agree on what makes the most sense for this tri-branded enterprise organization. And that helps us, because then we get consensus on within the entire organization, instead of in a normal environment where you're kind of getting pulled in multiple directions, where this is what's most important to this group, this part of the business, but something over here is just as important to this side of the business. Now I think we're in that situation where we're forced to all kind of come together and say, well, we can only do one, so let's agree what it's going to be, and then let's do that, and let's do it well. And so I think, I know that's very simplified explanation of it, but I believe that culturally, that is one of the things that we are seeing because of this. And I think, again, it helps us manage that demand. Managing our demand is so critical, because if you don't, as anyone in IT can tell you, you're so busy with the minutia, with the fires, with all the things, that it's hard to focus on your strategy.
Yeah,
and it's to do that.
Yeah, and your team only has so much bandwidth, right? And
Exactly. So I think those factors, I think we're, we don't lose sight of the goal, right? What's our strategy? What are the things we think are important? How do all these initiatives come together to provide one big value, or one value to the organization? That we haven't lost sight of that, but there's things we can do that don't necessarily cost a lot of money. And there are things we can do internally to continue to refine ourselves and get into a better. Other things like cleaning up redundant systems, getting rid of some technical debt. All these things we can do and actually save the organization money, while at the same time setting a foundation for what we know we want to do in the future. So there's plenty for us to do. It doesn't necessarily have to cost a lot, and it's all innovation. It's all part of that process of truly innovating. The idea of innovation with purpose, right?
Yeah.
Why are we doing it? What are we trying to accomplish? And I think this just puts a bigger spotlight on the why are we trying to do it? What's the purpose? What's the value? So I think it's all been that's something that we can continue to do, and it helps us.
These practices that you hope will stick into the future.
Yeah.
So I just, in the final bit of this session, I just want to really look to the future a little bit and discuss how we see the next year or two panning out. So I think, Jean-Louis, you mentioned that you're looking to try and restart in April. I'm not sure about you guys, Scott and Dimple. Yes, yeah. I know that it's the people I've been speaking to are still unsure. But I mean, what do we think it will take for to see cruise lines restarting safely? I think, Dimple, you mentioned vaccinations, but do you think we'll see the introduction of mandatory vaccination certificates?
I think it's a huge possibility. I really do. I think it mitigates a tremendous amount of risk. I think it'll make other guests feel comfortable. I'm not saying we're definitely going to do that, but I think it's a strong consideration. I would imagine a lot of the agencies regulating out this will give them more confidence in our industry. I think we talked about the fact that no other industry is under the same level of scrutiny as ours. Everyone else has been allowed to operate. I just saw the CDC is now mandating international passengers to be pre-tested and then be tested upon arrival when they return home, right? That's the first we've seen in the airline industry. That I was surprised, right? There's been no regulation requirement in that industry. So I do think vaccinations are at the crux of this. We're all looking at World Health passports or vaccination records, and linking your results, whether it's your pre-test results, to your identity, and technologies around that. I think that's pivotal to returning safe, because it is difficult, right? We look at all the changes. This virus has changed how many times? We thought the summer is going to be better, then this was going to get better, then we had another set of variants. So I think, you we look at the epidemiologists and all the medical community, they don't even know, right? So if I look at it from that perspective, vaccinations we think are critical to our return to sailing program.
Yeah. it'll be a critical component of it. Unfortunately, it won't mean the rest of this technology necessarily goes away immediately.
No, not at all. It's going to be around for a while, even with the vaccines, I think. So I guess now we come to the big question, which a lot of people listening in or watching in will be interested in, is you know, in terms of we've talked a lot about spending, IT spending, and how the focus is going to be on cost saving. When, or do you think the budgets, the spending budgets will return? And if so, when do you think they're going to return? Are we talking never, or maybe in 5 years, or
No,
a couple of years?
not yet. I think that everybody seems to agree that next year will be difficult, and perhaps in 2023 we could find our revenue and our margin like before, and the number of passengers that we planned to have in 2020. So I think that we have 2 years, 2 difficult years at least, but we hope for 2023, I think.
Mm.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think, you know, I will say that I don't think that means we just sit on our hands and status quo. I can, you know, I can tell you our leadership, they're very progressive in terms of understanding that we can't do that, and that we've got to find a way to keep moving forward. So this just ties back to the conversations we've been having. We just have to be a hell of a lot more efficient, and we just have to make decisions on what we all agree is most important, and that's where we'll fund those initiatives. So yeah, the budget won't be what it was, and it won't be for, you know, at least 2 years. I agree with Gene. But it doesn't mean that we won't get budget for what we think are critical, innovative initiatives that we feel will bring value to the company.
Okay, so I think, yeah, basically what you're saying, things are going to be more scrutinized for the next couple of years.
Yeah. And
works for us.
Which isn't necessarily a bad thing for us. I know that sounds strange, but again, when you look at it from a demand management perspective and the ability to really focus team, the business and the IT teams on an initiative, it's actually a value, a plus from that perspective. So, you know, you kind of have to look at it like that as well. But yeah, we still have to you know, you still have the stuff to keep the lights on. That doesn't go away. You got to do it. You got to, you know, you got to stay compliant. You got to keep your systems up to date. You got to do all that stuff, and it's costs money. So there'll be budget there. But in terms of really innovative initiatives, I think it'll just be more scrutinized, and we will, as a organization, have to all agree on what's most critical to the organization, and then those are the things that will continue to get funded.
Yeah, and I think that focus will accelerate delivery of those things, right? When you're focused on 3 or 4 most important things, you get more done. Everyone's not running in 10 different directions, and you don't finish projects then. You don't ever finish, they move.
Yep.
Yeah.
Try and do too many things at once.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that, Jean-Louis?
Oh, I think that big budget is really necessary when you want to change, for example, your booking system, your finance system, but all of this can be postponed. But for the quick win, for the mobile apps or very high level or high value development, it can be made without a lot of money. So just energy and skills.
Okay. Right, so one final question then to you all. I'll just go around, which is, I'll maybe start with you, Jean-Louis. What would you say the biggest lesson that you've learnt as a result of this pandemic?
We absolutely need flexibility. Nobody knows what happens in the next years. So we really think about how to change quickly what were just done last year. And so really think flexible and reactive. And yeah, it's really very important, I think.
Okay, great. So maybe yourself, Scott.
I would agree with that. I think it just demonstrated how important it was or is for us to have systems that are flexible, that allow us to deal with the unknown. You know, and we all hope this is it. This is the last time we experience something like this, but you know, nothing is certain, right? So we need to make sure that we take the lessons that we learned from this event and continue to expand on that and get better at really creating that redundancy and that flexibility and everything that we needed in order to pivot as quickly as we did when this happened. So I think that was a very, you know, important lesson learned. And you know, and the people again, you know, can't stress enough how important the people are to this. Everybody focuses on the technology, but at the end of the day, something like this, you really have to have a good culture within your organization. And you really have to focus on the people and making sure that, you know, they feel like they're a part of something, even when everybody's been dispersed to the world, because we don't know when we're all going to be in an office again, or if we're all going to be in office again. We just don't know. So I think it's important. That was a very important lesson that we've been learning in terms of how we manage that with our folks.
Okay. And finally, final words to Dimple then. So what lessons have you learned?
I don't have any final words. I think coming from a consulting background, both Scott and I, being flexible and adapting is in part of our DNA. And I think the lesson for the entire team is, I think when I look at our organization, they've learned the value of that and they learned how much they can achieve as a part of that. So I think there's been that piece, and then I think about anything bad, and something I've said to Scott for I think 20 plus years to some degree, but more so in the last 10 months, a lot of good can come from bad things, and taking advantage of that opportunity is critical. And that I think allows the organization, you're constantly driving towards something, and I think that's helped the morale. So you can't just go, all is lost. You pick up, you look, what can I do now? Where do we move forward? And I think that's the lesson of every day. How do I make something out of nothing to some degree?
And making sure people understand that they are contributing to something very important, that they're you know, more than just a cog in the machine.
Well, thanks everyone. For all three of you for all your insights. It's been a really, really good conversation, really good discussion. So I hope everybody who's been watching got a lot of insight from it. So thanks very much.
Ian, thank you. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks very much.